Alright, so the impact of Columbus on the Americas. How did he impact the Americas beyond just opening up European exploration and other things? We'll talk about that later. So Christopher Columbus, especially his second voyage, which the map here shows, after the second voyage and his subsequent voyages, the Americas changed dramatically and drastically, very much for the worse for the native population. Mostly the Spanish are operating on Hispaniola, which today is the Dominican and Haiti, but they also have people that are in Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and other of the islands in the area. So after that second voyage, Columbus puts into place something known as the tribute system. Now, we have those three G's, God, glory, and gold. Now, this is where Columbus starts tapping into the gold part. He wants gold. So, he tells the natives that he, in exchange for bringing him gold and food, in many cases, they will exchange it for some trinkets and copper rings, which the natives put, the Taino people is what they're called. The Taino would put copper rings around their necks if they bring gold, food, and other things that the Spanish want. Now, it seems to work out pretty well. They bring some gold. Sadly for the Spanish, the islands in the Caribbean are not very rich in gold at all. So while some is brought, if you look in the foreground of this picture, you do see some of the Taino people bringing treasures to the Spanish. If you look in the background, well, you see another story start happening. On the left, you see a cross being raised, and you see more and more ships arriving. Now, after the first voyage, Columbus starts bringing back thousands of Spanish settlers to this area. So it's not just him and his three ships. You start having a massive fleet of ships bringing people to settle in this world that previously they had not known about. And all of these new settlers, they're bringing God, one of the G's, and they want gold. So while the natives are bringing this through the tribute system, they start another system called the Encomienda system, where Spanish settlers, they essentially adopt a number of Taino people. And in exchange for bringing them God, the Taino are supposed to bring them food and gold and other things. Now, while that doesn't sound like a great deal, if they don't, that's where things start getting bad. You start seeing people being burned at the stake. You start seeing people's hands getting chopped off. The Taino people are really turned into slaves for the Spanish. They are first forced to work. And if they don't, well, the consequences are fairly dire. So these pictures are they certainly have a little artistic flair to them, but images like this of people being hung and burned and babies killed are not uncommon. So the tribute system and the Encomienda system, they are forcing the Taino people. And that has a drastic result on the population. So Hispaniola, Dominican, and Haiti today. In 1492, when Columbus arrived, they believed the population was between 250,000 and 300,000 people. Now, by 1555, so less than 60 years later, or a little more than 60 years later, the indigenous population is gone. There's maybe 100 people left. So you have hundreds of thousands of people dying. And this isn't just because that they're being killed. You have massive diseases being spread. You have people being worked to death. Certainly you do have people being killed, but also you have a lot of the Taino, you have suicide. They're being treated so poorly that that's one resort that many take. So Columbus's impact on especially that one island is massive. Not negative things. We have something called the Columbian Exchange. Now, yes, the Europeans are taking many things from the Americas. They want goods. They want goods to trade in Europe. So if you look at the top arrow, Americas to Europe and Asia, you have things like tomatoes. Tomatoes had never existed in Europe before. Cacao, pineapples, tobacco, pepper, sweet potatoes, all these things that we kind of take for granted today, but Europeans had never seen these before. These were new things. So especially tomatoes, the Italians didn't have any pasta or pizza until Columbus arrived in the Americas and started taking these goods back. And it's not just a one-way trip. You have many goods coming to the Americas. So things like citrus and grapes and bananas, which today many of us take for granted as being tropical and Central Caribbean foods, these were introduced by the Europeans. Coffee beans were not native to the Americas. If you look on the far right, though, you see so many diseases. This is why populations were being wiped out. You have smallpox, influenza, things that Europeans had developed resistance to that now the natives are dying. And with so many people, the Spanish are here, but once the Spanish arrive, that's when other nations start hearing about this new land full of fruits and food and things to do. Other countries want to come too, and particularly Spain and Portugal have the most technology, they have the most money to send people to settle. So the Pope Alexander gets involved and he draws a line on a map. He draws a line during the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, and it divides the Americas between the Spanish and the Portuguese. Since the maps were pretty bad at the time, if you look on the right, the current map of what line happened, well, the Portuguese didn't really get much. So the Portuguese get what is right of the line, the Spanish get what is left of it. So that is why Brazilians speak Portuguese, and the rest of Latin America, for the most part, speaks Spanish. So Treaty of Tordesillas divides between the Spanish and the Portuguese. They are sorry, slides are moving. Colonies are locations. They're a territory under the immediate control of a state. And they are far away from that governing state. So you have colonies, if you look at this map, these are all colonies that were established by a governing state. And in this case, these are all colonies of the British. So you have places all over the world that British are controlling politically and economically. Columbus is the beginning of this really big colonization that very small countries are controlling places far away from them, in many cases much larger than the home country. And finally, Native American tribes are decimated. Across the Americas, when Columbus arrived, the estimates in both North and South America is that there was 50 to 100 million people. Because of those diseases that you saw that were being brought over, smallpox, typhoid, influenza, that number diminishes by up to 90%. So native populations, even if they never met Columbus, those diseases spread and millions of people died.